no makeup and braces look? It's kind of very like 10-year-old girl.
It's natural though. It's natural. It looks good.
All right, guys, here we are. Screen share. Can everyone at home and in the classroom see this now?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down to where I believe we left off. All right, 3K. Yes, so we talked about verification of property condition, and we talked about assignment. All right, so section L, contingencies, right? Very important part of the contract because it stipulates how much time you have to get things done. So section L2, or L1 is for the loan contingency. This is typically the longest contingency of our contract, not always, but almost always. The way that our contract reads boilerplate is that it should be 17 days after acceptance. Typically we are 14 to 17 days, but before you ever decide what time frame is going to go into the contract here, who should we discuss this with? Who should we ask if they can perform within the 17 or 14, 15, 16-day period?
The lender.
Right, the buyer's loan professional. Exactly. So 14 to 17 is the most standard. It can go up to 21, but 21 is not going to give a seller much confidence. If you're going to shorten it at all below the 17, you want to make sure that the lender can perform in that amount of time. Over at the right-hand side here, we have a box for no loan contingency. So whether or not we have a loan, we have the ability to have contingency protection or not have contingency protection. If you needed to make your buyer offer really competitive, you could lift this loan contingency. However, only if the buyer's loan professional says that it's okay and the buyers are comfortable with it. This is not a common thing to do, and we never do this unless we need to be really competitive. All right. L2, appraisal. So loan and appraisal contingency are related. In order to get formal loan approval, you have to have the appraisal in. So the way our contract is written is 17 days for appraisal and 17 for loan. That makes zero sense because there's no chance that you're going to have loan approval in 17 days if you have appraisal contingency of 17 days. Let me tell you why. The process for obtaining an appraisal is that once escrow is opened and the escrow officer gives the loan officer the fees, estimated fees, then the loan officer, after, I think they need to get a couple of things, they can order the appraisal. The appraisal is ordered from an appraisal company. That appraiser then reaches out to the listing agent directly. The listing agent and the appraiser might have difficulty settling on a time to get the appraiser in. And because of this, it can take a couple of days. If you're the listing agent, be really, really sensitive to this. You don't want to stall an appraisal whatsoever. So make sure you get the appraiser in right away. Once the appraiser goes in, they may or may not complete the appraisal right away, right? Just depending on their schedule, how easy the property is to appraise. But also an appraiser might come in and say they're not going to finalize the appraisal until some things in the house are done. Oftentimes this is safety stuff like double strapping a water heater. It's called water heater bracing, or maybe there's a smoke detector that needs to be installed. And they say, well, we're not going to release the appraisal report until we have proof that this is done. And if you have a relaxed appraiser, they're going to say, okay, well, you can just text me some photos when it's done. If you don't, however, they will charge the buyer a reinspection fee and they'll want to go out back physically to the property and take a look to make sure, verify that it's done. Once they do this and complete it and turn it into the lender, it goes to an independent appraisal review department. Okay, the independent appraisal review department typically takes about 3 days to review it before they kick it back to the regular underwriting section or department of the loan institution. Only then could it be possible to have formal loan approval. Right? So we understand the correlated difference between the correlated relationship between the appraisal and the loan. So I never want to see an appraisal contingency less than 3 days shorter than your loan contingency. Does that make sense, everyone?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as far as the appraisal contingency, again, we don't typically lift an appraisal contingency if there is an appraisal, unless we need to make a super competitive offer. And this has some risks involved with it. So what you typically want to do is you want to make sure the property appraises, because there's no chance the buyer is going to get a loan unless there's some renegotiation or the buyer decides to bring in more cash if the property doesn't appraise. And so if we have to write an offer with no appraisal contingency, typically we would hide that appraisal under the protection of another contingency, most often the investigation contingency, which is the next item on the purchase contract on section L3. So just keep that in mind, is that if you need to write an offer with no appraisal contingency, you're going to have to talk to the lender and make sure they can get it done within the very tight time constraints within section L3 of the investigation contingency. All right. But again, this is not common. We don't do this typically unless we need to make our buyer offer super competitive.
Kristen, can I ask a question?
Yes.
For the appraisal contingency, is it better to have the 9A already in place, since you're talking about water heater bracing and all these things?
Yeah, so the retrofitting work that would be required to have a certificate of compliance, which is not 9A, that's the building report. Certificate of compliance is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're the listing agent, I typically have that stuff taken care of before I go to market. Yeah, if you can do it before you go to market, you should. For reasons like this, so that it doesn't cause unexpected delays with the buyer's loan process.
And then if the listing agent is I'm right now in an escrow, and the guy they did not do the certificate of compliance until like a few days ago, and we're literally supposed to close escrow next week.
I mean, obviously it went through. It's not the smartest move, but it didn't cause the delay. It can though. You know, you can sell a home that requires work to have the certificate of compliance, and some of them don't need any, you know, some need work, some don't. And some appraisers will call out things that need to be done and some will not. Just depends on, you know, how relaxed or by the book they are.
Okay.
But like I said, you can't control any of those things, so always better to have it done if you can. Oops, sorry. Let me situate myself here. Okay, so now we're on to investigation of property. All right, so was there a question? No? Okay. Investigation of property. So this is very erroneously referred to often as the physical contingency, okay? So let me tell you why you should not refer to it as a physical contingency. I would highly recommend that you guys go into Zip Forms and look at a copy of a contingency removal form, okay? A contingency removal form is used to formally lift any or all of the contingencies a buyer has. And under the investigation contingency, you can think of it like a hand, okay? And the physical investigation of the property, the inspections, is only one finger on the hand. The buyer needs to investigate whether or not the property is insurable, whether or not title is going to be delivered in a way that they're comfortable with. There are many parts, many fingers on the hand of the investigation contingency. So particularly in the offer and counter offer process, you will see a lot of counter offers that say physical contingency to be blank days. Well, that's very incorrect. And I oftentimes will go ahead, and if I'm representing the buyer, I'll respond to that seller counter offer, and I'll say nothing, because technically they've only altered the time frame on one of the fingers of that hand of that contingency, if that makes sense. Does everyone follow along with that? Guys?
Yes.
Yes.
it is.
Okay, great. So make sure you refer to this contingency as the investigation contingency. So typically for a residential property, this contingency is anywhere from 17 to 14 days long. 17 is a long time, but you might do 17 up to 21 if the property was like a massive estate home or something like that, like a mega house, because you'll have weird inspections you wouldn't otherwise have. For a single family home of normal size, I would say it'd be typical to be 10 to 14 days. And for a condo, since you're not doing a lot of the inspections you would on a single family, it'd be typically 7 to 10 days. And when we talk about inspections and negotiations in that class, we will go ahead and we will discuss what all of the types of inspections are and what secondary inspections are and how that would affect the timeframes that you need to write into your contract. All right. Section L3, the second part, informational access to the property. So even though a seller and listing agent might counter the investigation contingency on a property, they would typically not remember or bother to alter the informational access to property. And this contractually gives the buyer right to access the property for informational purposes. It's not a contingency. It does not create cancellation rights, but it gives the buyer rights to access the property pretty much for any reason that they want to. So if you're representing a buyer and your buyer's lifted all their contingencies and they want to go back in for a reason, and the listing agent's trying to block access or getting annoyed, you contractually have the right for as long as this time frame, if it's not altered or if it's altered, whatever it says here. Okay. So you can force access if you need to. And at that point, it's still really important to maintain good relationships with the agents you're working with, because it does affect you, for the, in perpetuity for the rest of your career. So you still have to play nice, but, if your buyer wants access, your buyer wants access. And there's no further real negotiations unless something goes wrong at that point. Typically, this is the last contingency. Not typically. This is typically the last contingency that involves much negotiation. All right. Review of seller documents. Seller documents are different than disclosures. Okay. So we have seller documents, title report, common interest disclosures, leased or liened item review, if there's a sale of buyer's property. But down here under section N1, we have seller delivery of documents. And hold on. Yeah, seller delivery of documents and review of seller documents. So what are seller documents? They're disclosures, and they are also reports that the seller is required to give to us, such as a natural hazard zone disclosure report, preliminary title report, HOA documents. So these are all broken apart as to what they refer to. So the review of the seller documents is how much time a buyer has to review the documents once the seller has delivered them. All right, so our contract states 17 days. It's ridiculous, though, for it to take 17 days for a buyer to review, let's say seller disclosure package. Once a buyer and buyer's agent receive the seller disclosure package, it really shouldn't take more than a couple of days for a buyer to review. So I always alter section L4 to 5 days after acceptance. This is the way that these contingency timeframes are broken out are very different than our old contract. And so when this contract was rolled out in January, I oftentimes forgot to modify L4. And when I could have had offers straight accepted, I would get counter offers because the listing agent would shorten this down to 3 to 5 days. 3 to 5 days is totally fine. Okay. Preliminary title report. Again, this is the time for us to review as buyers. Okay, once we receive it. Guys, what if we receive reports or disclosures after the time frame in which the seller is supposed to deliver them to us. How many days do we have to review those documents?
5 days after delivery.
Another 5
That's
days.
right. What if we've already lifted our contingency?
3 days, is that 3 days?
No,
It
it's
extends
5,
it.
still 5. And our contingency, even if we've actively lifted it, it is put back in place. So you again have contingency protection to cancel. So if I've lifted all buyer contingencies and the listing agent delivers a revised seller property questionnaire, or they forgot to give us a disclosure, and all of a sudden they give it to us towards the end of escrow, you have the right to cancel built back in for 5 days. Okay, so if you're a listing agent, very, very important to get all of your disclosures taken care of right away. Again, my preference is to take care of it prior to going to market, because as the listing agent, I should know everything I need to know about the property so that I can protect their purchase price. Was there a question? No? Okay. Let's see here. Common interest disclosures, those are the HOA documents. So again, this is time to review. Okay, this is time, I think, hold on, let me see here. Yeah, time to review them. So again, this can be 5. Review of leased or liened items. So if there's an item that the seller does not own and it's leased, and that lease needs to be transferred to a buyer, we have to see a copy of those documents so that the buyer is aware of what their obligations and costs would be. And so if there were any leased items, I would probably also change this time frame to 5 days. All right, removal or waiver of contingency. If you choose to lift any contingencies that are listed in our contract with your offer, you would go ahead and you would check this box, see are attached. A contingency removal form would auto-populate in zip forms. You would modify that document to reflect whatever contingency you were lifting with the offer, and you would attach it to the offer. All right, section L8, sale of buyer's property. So this is commonly referred to as a contingent offer, which is very confusing because every offer has contingencies in it, right? Even if you wrote an offer with no contingencies, because the seller has to deliver you documents, there are going to be contingencies. So it's kind of annoying and it's very confusing. But if a buyer needs to sell their property, successfully close it in order to make the purchase of this property, which they're making an offer on, that's referred to as a contingent offer. It is not considered a very strong offer. It'd be considered a pretty weak offer. And it could be stronger in some instances. So if I'm a buyer and I'm making a contingent offer on your home, and I give you this car form COP, which has a lot of information to fill out on it. And that form indicates and proves that my property that I'm selling is in escrow and all of the contingencies are lifted. Well, that's a much stronger contingent offer than most. However, if it's that strong, why am I making it contingent, right? Also, car form COP is extremely complicated. It has a lot of sections to modify what it is you're intending to say, what you're trying to say. And they're in relation to items in the contract for the offer you're writing. So you have to kind of flip back and forth continuously and make sure whatever you're saying on the document makes sense. I would highly recommend sitting down with Michael Rosales, scheduling an appointment if you need to make a contingent offer and you need to use car form COP. Okay. I barely understand it. I mean, I do, but it takes me a while. And I have to really spend some time reviewing, particularly before I explain to my clients. All right, section M, possession. The way that the contract is boilerplate written. Sorry, does anyone have any questions?
I do. I have a question in regards to the contingency removal.
Mhm.
So are you saying that if you go into escrow with no contingencies and so now then you're in the middle of escrow and you get a document from the seller, it automatically will give you a contingency?
Yes.
What? Okay.
100%. I actually have a class. You'll have to go back far on YouTube, but it's a class on how to make and receive a truly contingent offer.
Okay.
So if you're a
Wow.
listing agent and you want to receive a truly contingent offer, you have to have every single report disclosure document that you need to deliver to the buyer prior to opening escrow. And you'd get a receipt for reports. You would deliver it to them before you actually accept their offer.
Noted. That's definitely something that most agents don't know.
Uh-huh. I know.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I actually got a buyer client from that, sorry, I got a client who was a buyer who ended up selling property with me, a developer client, because when he was trying to make a non-contingent offer, I did all of that. And he was like, wow, that's true. I never thought of it that way. So you will really stand out in a crowd of agents if you know that. All right, let's see here. Possession. Okay, possession. So this is actually when the property is turned over to the buyer. So the way our contract is written, it's upon notice of recordation. What time can recording take place, guys?
Recording after
The day after signing the docs?
So once the loan funds,
Wait, what?
no, one day after.
So recording can take any place anytime between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. when the county recorder's office is open. And yes, it would be one day after funding the loan typically, unless the recording got pulled for some reason. All right.
Christine, can I ask?
Yeah.
Once I had a situation, we need for some contingency 5 working day. Oh, it depends on the bank scheduler. You told that amount of the day. Always we're thinking about these days only like working day because it's connecting with the bank, but we do not have this words in this offer. So, and I got conversation and nobody believed me. Well, everybody's saying that 5 days, it's like calendar days, and we're not counting this as working day.
So it's called business days and calendar days.
Yes.
All
Yes.
contingencies in our contract are calendar days.
Calendar days,
Except for the earnest money deposit contingency, which is business days.
Yeah, what I'm looking at this initial deposit amount,
Yeah,
and there is within 3 business days. Okay.
yep.
Mhm.
It's the only
Thank you.
contingency unless we modify the contract that's written that way. Okay,
Mhm.
so what's the question?
They were fighting that this is like exception, and they put 7 days because they were counting like calendars days. Even if I told that initial money deposit and always only business days, because they.
Well, I would just highlight the contract or take a photo of it and send it to them and show
Yeah,
it.
but they pointed like additional terms, so it's something like special, like excuse business days. That's why
No,
in
additional
terms and
terms is
conditions.
just for additional terms. It's
Mhm.
not in relation to that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so I don't love the way that our contract is written if I'm the listing agent or as an agent, period, for possession, because possession means I need to deliver the keys to the buyer, the new owner, and I might have meetings all day. So if I'm the listing agent, I prefer 6 p.m. But if I'm the buyer's agent, I don't really care what time of possession takes place. I leave it notice of recording. It's more of a convenience factor thing. I don't want anyone getting mad at me as a listing agent if I can't deliver the keys for 6 hours after we get confirmation of recording, if that makes any sense. Okay. This also refers to 3M2. And that has to do with what we refer to as a seller leaseback. So time of possession is not always delivered when we record escrow. Sorry, someone sent me a text message. Is not always delivered at the time we close escrow. If a seller has a leaseback, it would be delivered at the end of the leaseback period. So a leaseback can be contractually identified using two forms, either car form SIP, seller to remain in possession, if it is 29 days or less. If the seller leaseback is going to be 30 or more days, you would use car form RLAS, which stands for residential lease after sale. And the reason for this is because anytime anyone resides in a property 30 or more days in the state of California, it automatically creates a legal landlord tenancy relationship, even if that person's never paid any rent. Okay, that's what we call being a squatter, right? Someone who's never had a lease, who never had permission to be at the property. But it can also refer to an invited guest who has overstayed their welcome. I've thankfully never had an instance where a seller failed to deliver possession to the new owner, to the buyer, past what we've negotiated. So that's good. But if I have any control, so like a lot of people just default to saying, oh, we'll do a 30-day lease back. And I'll say, do you really need 30 days or can we do 29 so that we can use car form SIP? Why do I want to do that? Well, because in theory, if it is 29 or fewer days, you can technically forcibly remove the former owners, the sellers, as trespassers. I don't know if police would actually do that or not. I hope I never have to find out, but technically, legally, they would be trespassing.
The sheriff, what?
The car form SIP and RLAS go over whether or not there are any deposits to be held by escrow, if there's any consideration, if there's any cost for the lease back or not. So you would go ahead and this is by the way, a very common situation in real estate. So if you're not familiar with car form SIP or RLAS, you will probably want to print them out, read them, take a look at them. Okay. If your escrow is, in this instance, it would be a single family occupied by a tenant because we're using residential purchase agreement. If it's units shouldn't be included on residential purchase agreement at all because we have a purchase agreement for a multifamily property. It's called a residential income purchase agreement, and only that contract should be used for purchasing units. All right, but you can have a tenant in a condo or a single family. Okay, and so if a property is being sold with the tenant in place, you would need to write the offer and check this box. So car form TOPA would be attached. Okay, if you would expect the tenant occupied property to be delivered vacant, that should be indicated on car form TOPA. And it should be written into additional terms under the purchase contract, which would be here, other terms, section R. Okay. Seller delivery of documents. All right, this is a more important contingency. So this is the time that the seller has to give the buyer all of the documents they're required to transfer to them. And most importantly, the seller disclosure package. And so for me, I like 2 to 3 days after acceptance to be the time frame. Some listing agents will scoff at this, and I'll ask them just to please try to hurry. And the reason for this is because I really, as the buyer's agent, want to read what is in the seller disclosure package so that if there's anything alarming there, A, we can get out of the escrow before the buyer spends any money on inspections or appraisal. Or hopefully, B, we see something on there that the seller's indicated was a problem or was a problem that's been corrected. And we can ask our inspectors to take a really close look at that instead of having to pay them to go back out and look at something or having a secondary inspection that we might not need.
Did you get my message?
What's that? Was there a question? No?
No.
Okay. Sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions. So nobody ever alters this. The reason that this was added to the contract, if you've heard me talk about the parties in escrow, escrow is a really important part of our transaction. And what is that sound? Sorry, my neighbors upstairs have something that sounds like a foghorn being blown above me. Like, what is that?
Oh my God.
Move.
Can you guys hear it?
Why your own house?
My neighbors are.
James, can you hear this?
Popcorn?
Yeah.
James, can you come here for a second?
I do hear it. It's like.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hear it, yes.
It sounds like reverb.
It just keeps on going on over and over and over again. That's not a vacuum. Okay, whatever. We're at sea, guys. Oh, it stopped. Okay. Yay. I'm still hearing it.
Buy a new place, buy a condo.
Okay. Okay. Let's see here. So people wouldn't sign escrow instructions. Buyer and seller wouldn't sign escrow instructions, and escrow needs that package and the escrow instructions back so they can do their job. So we never alter this, guys, but what do I tell you to tell your buyers and sellers when you open escrow about escrow and what they need? It stopped. I tell you to tell your clients that escrow is really important and to get what they ask for back to them as immediately as possible. Okay, so that's what this section is about under N2. N3, time to pay fees for ordering HOA documents. So sellers typically pay for HOA documents. Not always, I mean, it can be negotiated differently, but sellers typically pay for HOA documents. And HOA management companies typically require, do you have to do that right now, love? James, can you do that later? You want to come say hi?
Don't pay the rent, please, for next
Say
month.
hi. Everyone can see your hands.
Pay the rent.
Hey, how you doing, mate?
Oh, Errol says hi.
Just getting a cold beer.
Hey, hi.
Lovely.
Hi.
Aw,
Let's behave yourself over there.
Nice. Congrats.
thank you. Let's see, back to screen share.
What a
Aw,
job, Christine.
sweet, right?
Your job or something.
okay. So an HOA management company typically requires that a seller pays for them before they will even start working on them. They're quite a lot of money. Oftentimes they will require a check that has to be messengered over to them or credit card payment. So escrow would help facilitate this, but a seller would make the payment directly. This is one of the only things that you'll really have to watchdog as a listing agent. I would not recommend ordering HOA documents prior to opening escrow. Can anyone tell me why? Any guesses? Huh? Well, there's something called minutes that are required as part of the HOA document package that should be delivered to the buyer. And the minutes are minutes of the monthly meeting notes. And because we need the last 12 months, if we don't have the last month, we're going to have to go ahead and order HOA documents anyhow. So
Yes, hi.
get out of here. Okay. Sorry, guys. So yeah, I wouldn't have those ordered ahead of time because I wouldn't want to be caught without the latest month of minutes. All right, section N4, install smoke alarms, CO detectors, water heater bracing. This is something that typically, again, the seller's definitely responsible for it because they have to provide access if this stuff is not done. But in subsequent sections, we stipulate in the contract who's to pay for that. And this is also, so some of the stuff, if you're working with a property in the city of Los Angeles or Beverly Hills, we have more stringent requirements on what's referred to as retrofitting. And retrofitting is that blanket term for what is done to things to make them up to current safety code, right? So that would have stuff to do with smoke alarms, CO detectors, water heater bracing. That's in relation to state law. So our contract covers what's required by the state in section N4. However, in the city of Los Angeles, we have additional requirements like automatic gas shutoff valve and all of that. And like I said, that's handled with the retrofitting company and would be reflected on the certificate of compliance statement. So was it Annette, was that you who told me you had a client who, or you were in an escrow where the seller waited until a few days before closing escrow to do the retrofitting? Yes, someone in class just said that. So that typically wouldn't be allowed, or you could try to enforce it being done sooner if section N4 had a time frame in here of whatever time frame was in here, you could enforce that. So technically retrofitting in the city of Los Angeles should be done whatever time frame, within whatever time frame is stipulated under section N4 of our contract. All right. N5, evidence of representative authority. And the way our contract is written, and it doesn't have a place for it to be altered, is 3 days after acceptance. What is evidence of representative authority? It's evidence of the authority to act on behalf of any type of entity, which can also be taken care of in CAR form RCSD-S or -B. RCSD stands for Representative Capacity Signature Disclosure Statement, okay? And the -S would stand for seller and the -B would stand for buyer, because we can have a representative capacity signature disclosure statement for either a buyer or seller. However, if you have a buyer or seller that is in an entity, buyer or seller, you can actually take care of it within this contract. You don't necessarily have to do it after the fact. You don't have to use an RCSD form. But what is evidence of representative authority? On the forms, it's simply a statement. They're saying, I am the trustee of my trust, or I am the managing member of my corporation. What our contract is talking about is proof. No one really enforces this contingency timeframe. But if you have any doubt as to whether or not the parties involved are legitimate, you might want to be pushy about enforcing this. So what is proof? Well, like for a corporation, it would typically be the articles of incorporation would stipulate who has the authority to act on behalf of the entity in relation to selling assets such as real property. In a trust, it'd be a copy of the trust. Who do we typically give this evidence of representative authority to? The title company. The title company is the one very concerned about making sure the parties involved have the authority to act on behalf of the entity. We can give this to escrow, who would give it to title, or we can give it directly to both.
Hey, Christen,
Yes.
would an attorney in fact also that come and play in this situation?
Richard, I didn't catch the last bit of that. Can you?
Would an attorney in fact come into play in this?
Yes, an attorney, it'd be called power of attorney. An attorney, in fact, is someone with power of attorney. And yes, this would also fall in category into the category of evidence of representative authority. However, I want you guys to be aware of something. In the state of California, even if someone has power of attorney to my entire life, that power of attorney would not give them the right to act as buyer or seller in any real estate transaction for me. they would have to have what's referred to as a special power of attorney that's notarized and related to just that property. So you can't even have a blanket power of attorney that gives someone the right to act on my behalf in a real estate transaction. It would be a real estate transaction for a certain property. And typically escrow would draft that document to make sure that the language is correct.
And
Okay.
Kristen, what about an executor or an executrix? Can they act as a representative authority?
Yeah, an executor of the state absolutely can. In fact, they're appointed. Yeah, there's typically an attorney involved with that. And so they would have all the documents for you. You'd forward them to the title company, and the title company would tell you if they need anything else.
Okay, thank you. And as far as trusts go, they have to be instructions in the trust for a person to act as the authority?
Yes, so like I have a trust myself, and then I have a trust with myself and my dad. So my dad is my co-trustee in our joint trust, and we actually have set it up to where either one of us individually can sign to take care of any of the to do anything with the assets in our trust, or we can both sign. Okay, but we could have it set up to where we both have to sign every single time we do anything with the assets of the trust. That's why the title company is going, and we need to be concerned about making sure that we know who needs to sign on behalf of that entity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Let's see here. Items included and excluded. Can anyone tell me the legal definition of what should be included with a property? Yeah, anything that is permanently
Fixture.
Yes. By legal definition, anything permanently attached to the real property should be included with the property. This would mean blinds. This would mean curtain rods, but not curtains. This would mean a television mount, but not a TV. Do our clients know the definition of this? No.
No.
Can you trust that the other agent knows the definition of this? You guys know my famous Murphy bed story, right? You cannot trust that anyone knows. So what do? You make sure it's extremely clear what the buyer expects to have included and excluded. You make sure that the seller is aware of what the buyer is asking for. If you're the listing agent, you should have made sure of this in the listing contract, because there's a section for this in the listing contract as well. And you'll want to refer, if you're the listing agent, back to the listing contract before you just have a seller accept an offer. Why? Because even if your listing contract says something's included or excluded, the buyer's not party to that contract. So it doesn't matter if it's in the listing contract for the buyer. It doesn't matter if you told the buyer and the buyer's agent. It doesn't matter if it was publicly disclosed on the MLS. It doesn't matter. It matters what's in the contract. Okay, it has to be in the contract. Nothing else matters. So be very clear. It's okay to be redundant. It's okay to say additional items included or excluded. I highly encourage that. And sometimes it's extremely difficult to identify what you're talking about. So what can you do? You could say additional items included, and you could check this box and you could say see attached photo. And if you wanted to, you could actually take a photo, print it out, and make it part of your contract. Okay, so please be very, very specific, be redundant, be inclusive of what's included and excluded. Don't leave anything up to chance. You'll have enough fighting as it is, even if you're 100% airtight on your contract. Okay. I guarantee you this will be a problem many times in your career. Also, guys, if your buyer is purchasing with a loan, it can be problematic at times if the contract includes too much furniture, because at some point the lender says, this furniture has value and has affected the purchase price. They're not in the business of lending on furniture purchase. They're lending on residential real estate. Okay, so check with your lender if a property is being sold with, all of the furnishings, or if your buyer is asking for too much furnishing. or a lot, not too much, I should say, a significant amount. And what do I mean by a significant amount? I mean, beyond what's listed here in our contract, if your additional items include more than, the allotted space that's here, if there's more than, 5 or 6 items, then I would say you should probably check with the buyer's lender to make sure that they're okay with it. Okay, allocation of costs. So in this section under Q, here is where, sorry, before I move on to allocation of costs, does anyone have any questions about what we've discussed so far? I'm going to take that as a no. Okay. Section Q. Q1 is for the natural hazard zone disclosure report, also referred to as the NHD. Okay. Typically, the seller pays for this report, and that's because it's legally required that the seller provide this information to the buyer under California state law. You also may hear, if you ever take a class with the natural hazard zone disclosure rep, that you should not say seller's choice as far as who provides this report. I vehemently disagree with this, because if there's any error on the information, and as the buyer or the buyer's agent, we've stipulated what company this information should be provided by, it all of a sudden makes the liability for inaccurate information ours, right? Because this is a seller required report, I always say seller's choice, because I want the liability for the information being accurate to remain with the seller. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Oh, you guys sound like a classroom who's annoyed with me.
No.
I miss seeing your faces. Oh. Let's see here. Smoke alarms, CO detectors, water heater bracing. Again, typically paid for by the seller. Why? Well, it's the seller's property, right? We don't know if the escrow is going to close. So typically a buyer wouldn't pay for something on a property they don't yet own and don't know if they'll actually successfully close on. Also, I would highly discourage a buyer's agent from ever taking the responsibility on for the buyer, because we don't know how much it's going to cost. Like I said, this stuff falls under state law, but also there's more requirements in the city of Los Angeles. And so this could be something where no work's required. This could be something where, even a couple $1,000s of work is required. And because of this, this should remain a seller cost responsibility, right? If a retrofitting company needs to come in and only needs to, install a couple of CO2 detectors, no big deal, $100, whatever. But if they need to come in and pull a permit to install a automatic gas shutoff valve, they need to replace a bunch of toilets, they need to install smoke detectors all over the place. This can be something that can be quite costly. So I don't typically recommend that the buyer would take on this responsibility. Section Q5 is also part of the same thing as Q4. The way our contract is written is it's written this way, where it's talking about the state requirements in Q4, but the possible additional requirements that individual cities can have on top of that. Okay, so we talked about it in the city of Los Angeles. We have certificate of compliance and the 9A Los Angeles City building report, right? And again, the seller typically pays for these things. Same thing for section Q6, government required point of sale corrective or remedial actions. If the city requires that work is done, typically the seller is paying for this, again, for all the reasons that we've discussed already. Who can you guys check with if you don't know if the city has requirements beyond what the state has? Hmm? Who can you check with? Not title. Typically, escrow would be a good person to ask. Also, a lot of retrofitting companies, their websites have lists of cities and whether or not they have additional requirements. Okay. All right. Is someone asking a question? No. Okay. section Q7 and Q8, escrow and title. Who typically determines who the escrow company over on the right-hand side where it says escrow holder and title company on the right-hand side where it says title holder, who typically chooses who escrow is and who title is?
Seller.
Seller. Do you know California state law actually says it's illegal for a seller to choose the title company for a buyer?
Seriously?
It is, yeah, it is serious. However, our industry standard is that the seller chooses. Now, what if you're representing a buyer and you have a compelling reason to ask for your escrow and or title company, like you have other concurrent deals with that client going on at an escrow company, it just makes it easier, that kind of thing. Well, you would explain that to the listing agent prior to writing your offer. But typically, I am much more interested in getting my buyer offer accepted than I am having choice of escrow and title, right? But I do want you to know that it is not actually legal for a seller to stipulate what title company a buyer uses, even though that is what's customary in the Los Angeles area. That is not customary in Northern California. And it's customary for under escrow that the buyer and seller each pay their own fees. Okay, they have different fees. It's customary they pay their own fees. There are two types of title insurance typically involved in most transactions. So if a buyer is purchasing with a loan, this is when it's typically involving two types of title policies. One is the owner's title policy, which the seller typically pays for. One is the buyer's lender's policy, which the buyer typically pays for. Now, in Northern California, the buyer typically pays for both the owner's title policy and the buyer's title policy, but not here, okay? How about county transfer tax, city transfer tax? Who typically pays these?
Seller.
Seller, yeah. There are a few regional differences that I'm aware of, okay? In South Bay, the area I grew up in, it is common for a buyer and seller to split the city transfer tax. That is not the case in the area that we work in where the seller typically pays. And guys, there is a huge difference between county transfer tax and city transfer tax. And not all cities have transfer tax, okay? County transfer tax in the county of Los Angeles, and I haven't checked recently, but it was $1.10 per thousand the last time I checked. And you can always check with an escrow officer to verify the costs. But the city of Los Angeles, I think, is like $4.50 or something per thousand. So that's a significant transfer tax. City of Beverly Hills, on the flip side, has zero transfer tax.
I don't want to buy anything in the city of Los Angeles.
What's that?
I don't want to buy anything in the city of Los Angeles anymore.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel like that, especially with our new ULA mansion tax.
Yeah.
HOA fee for preparing disclosures, that's a seller cost. It says it in the contract. HOA certification fee. It says the buyer pays for this. What is it and why does the buyer pay it? It's a certification for the buyer's lender. Okay, that's why the buyer pays for it.
Okay.
HOA transfer fees. Typically, the seller pays for this. It'd be a transfer fee that the HOA requires when a homeowner sells their home. Okay, private transfer fee. Sometimes an HOA will have a private transfer fee, and the way our contract is written is that the seller would pay for it. That's typical. Home warranty plan is typically chosen by the buyer because it's for the buyer. So as the buyer's agent, a lot of times we're the one directing what home warranty company should be in here, but you should check with your buyer, and the seller typically pays for it. Why? I don't know, but that's industry standard. Okay, so it's really important that you get a pretty accurate number in here. If it's too much, a seller's agent is going to counter it. If it's too little, buyer's going to have to pay for the difference out of pocket, which typically means that you're going to pay for it. And it's, yeah, and we don't want to do that, right? So how can we have an accurate estimate as to what the home warranty policy is going to cost? Home warranty companies have excellent, accurate estimator tools online. So if you like working with First American Home Warranty and your buyer agrees to ask for First American Home Warranty, buyer's home warranty policy, you can go to their website, you can enter information in there, you can stipulate what types of coverage. I prefer to give my clients more coverage than less coverage, and it will give you a dollar amount to write in. This dollar amount is pretty typical depending upon what coverages you want. And how much square footage is there at the property. I want you to be aware though, if it is multi-family property, if there's more than one unit, the cost can be much higher. Also, in the left-hand side here, where it talks about the home warranty coverage, I like to say the buyer can have an upgraded policy and any other options that they'll determine during the course of escrow. And in this way, I'm protecting their right to add any of the optional coverages that are available to them. And like I said, when I have priced this section out here, I have checked any of the applicable optional coverages that I think that they could want, because I would rather them have more than less. And it doesn't really matter. It's not a significant amount of money. I always recommend to my clients that they have a home warranty policy, even if we waive that the seller buys one for us. They should buy one themselves, and they should always keep one in place. Just like any insurance company, they make it very difficult to make claims. However, I've had several clients who had extremely costly repair and replacement work done, including complete HVAC system replacement more than once. So I would always recommend that my client keep their policy coverage active. All right. Section R is for other terms. You can write anything that you need to in here. I strongly caution you, however, though, to make sure that a very seasoned agent, until you're super contract comfortable, is reviewing whatever you write in here, because even if it's extremely clear and makes sense, it might affect a different part of the contract you also need to modify and address here. The last thing that you want in any contract is what is called an undefined term. An undefined term means an action needs to take place, yet we don't stipulate who's doing it and who's paying for it if there's a cost involved. It needs to be very thorough. So make sure if you're in mentorship, your mentor is taking a look at this, or if you need my help, that I take a look at this, or Michael Rosales takes a look at this. Anytime you use free form section of the contract, and it's very necessary and it's very common to do so, but I strongly advise that you're careful and you have oversight.
Kristen, I have a question.
Sure.
So here, the other terms is where we can write the acceleration clause.
An acceleration clause, yes.
Here we should write it if you do want to.
Yeah, if you wanted to do an acceleration clause, you would put it in here. Yes.
Okay. And
do you guys know what an acceleration clause is?
No, can you explain? Not quite.
Malika, you want to take a stab at it?
Yes, acceleration clause is basically when you put any offer and maybe you're in a multiple offer situation, you're representing buyer, and they counter you with the multiple offer form, and it means, okay, I'm going to, when you're writing this, it means you're going to pay X amount more than the most
highest offer.
The highest offer.
Yeah, so an acceleration clause, you can put in other terms in a very competitive situation. And I have some language for it. And it would basically say that my buyers will pay whatever dollar amount higher than any other highest offer received up to, and you should always add a cap, right? Because what if someone comes in 200,000 higher than my buyers would ever be willing to pay? Obviously, it's not gonna apply in that situation. So up to a certain dollar amount, my clients will pay $10,000 higher than any highest offer received by the sellers, as long as they provide me proof of that higher offer. Okay. And check with the listing agent, because not all listing agents or sellers welcome an acceleration clause. And if anyone needs the specific language for the acceleration clause, I have some language I've been using for a long time that I worked with on with an attorney to put together. I've given it out in class before. Malika, I think you have it as well. So just email me if you need that. And I will pop my email into the chat box for anyone who doesn't have it. Okay.
I have a question regarding probate.
Ask me, you can call me after class, honey. I'm not going to answer a probate class or probate question during PA class.
No. It's a list. There's a listing that the house is probate. Should I mark this?
Malika, after class,
Okay.
You want to ask about where you mark it on the RPA?
Yeah.
That was in the previous class. That's.
But it's on for property addenda and advisories.
Yeah.
Under other things.
So it's usually a
Number 4.
Huh?
Number 4.
Number 4.
4A. Right below.
Oh yeah, we're not there yet, honey. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So if you have a probate, if you're writing a probate offer, yes, you would check this box and you would fill out probate agreement purchase addendum. And what else would you give to your clients? A probate advisory.
Oh, I should give them probate advisory.
It automatically populates when you check that box.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
I just probate sale.
Okay.
And
So
what?
go ahead.
Nothing. Later.
Okay. So if you, you should always read through these and just check. Do any of these addendums apply? Do I need to add any of these? Okay. Other addenda. So, do you have an addendum to add to the contract? Sometimes what you need to write into the contract free form will not fit under the other terms section. So you would need to add an addendum. You would identify the addendum number. If it's an offer, it should be addendum number 1, but you could have more than one addendum if you needed more space. So you could say addendum number 1, comma 2, comma 3. If you're writing a backup offer, this is where you'd indicate that it's a backup offer and the addendum's attached. If there's a septic or a well on the property, anything like that. If the buyer that's writing the offer is going to do a 1031 tax deferred exchange, you would add car form BXA as an addendum, short sale addendum, court confirmation addendum. Guys, what is a court confirmation addendum in relation to?
Conservatorship.
Conservatorship, estate sale, or probate if there's court confirmation. So if you're dealing with any of those types of listings, you need to ask the listing agent, is there court confirmation required? Because if there's not, you don't need it. And a sale without court confirmation, at least in the case of a probate sale, is much easier and much more like a normal sale than one with court confirmation. One with court confirmation is very different. Okay. If you know that the seller is going to use the proceeds from their sale to buy what's referred to as an upleg income property in a 1031 exchange, then you would check this box for the SXA. So if you have a buyer who's going to do an exchange, BXA, seller who's going to do an exchange, SXA. Can you have both?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Section C, these items that are checked here are always going to be checked because they're automatically attached to the purchase agreement. Okay. You should not go through here and add things other than what is required, absolutely required. So guys, if the seller holds title to the property in a trust, you need a trust advisory. That's very common. So you should read this. If you're making an offer to any type of seller that is a trustee, you need to add a trust advisory. Okay.
Christine, can you say something about tenancy in common purchase addendum?
Tenancy in common, you don't need to worry about that.
You don't
when
need
you're
to
writing an
worry.
offer. You do not need to worry about that.
That's-
Are you talking about tenancy in common like a tick property, or are you talking about a seller holding vesting as a tenant in common? Two very different things. A lot of real estate has similar terms, but very different meaning.
I see.
John? You mean a tick property like a condo, or do you mean tenant in common the way someone holds title in their vesting?
I see. For the single family home like that.
Yeah, so if you have a single family home and it's held as tenants in common, you don't need to worry about that at all. That's simply the way a homeowner holds title to their home.
Oh,
And
I
what does
see.
that mean? That means like if James and I owned a property together and I owned 50% as a tenant in common and he owned 50% as a tenant in common, technically I could sell my 50% while he could remain owning his 50%. I could sell my 50% to someone. I don't know a lender that would probably make a loan on that type of sale, but technically I could sell my 50% interest.
Oh,
Sounds complicated, right? Because he probably lives here, I probably live here. So it's not a common type of thing. But it's mostly so that if, let's say James and I had been married to other people and had children with those other people, it means that I can, a lot of times tenancy in common, it's done so that I can handle my estate with my descendants in a way that excludes my spouse typically. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope so.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
I don't know who at Keller Williams, but someone for a very long time at Keller Williams has been teaching people to add a statewide buyer and seller advisory, which is what, 14, 16 pages long? It's just an advisory. It's required as part of the seller disclosure package. Please do not include it as part of the contract. We don't include things we don't need to because it's particularly uncustomary things that aren't required. There's nothing we alter on them because if if escrow or title fail to attach this SBSA to the contract, it goes to the lender. They don't technically have a full copy of the contract and it can cause delays. So let's not make things that are not typically part of a contract, part of the contract. Okay, so that's it as far as what we need to fill out on the first few pages of the contract. The rest of these items, they're referred to here in the second column of our terms. So, excuse me, if you wanted to know a little bit more about what section Q5 meant, you would go to section 10A and 10B2, the contract, and you could read those paragraphs and they would further explain about those sections of our contract. Okay, so we don't need to complete anything on these subsequent pages of the contract, but you are absolutely 100% responsible for reading them and understanding them. Okay, so read these portions of the contract. It's just the first few pages that we fill out, but you need to understand all of these sections of the contract. I want to point out a couple of common areas that agents miss also during signing, and we'll look at the last page of the contract, and then I'll open the class up for questions, but we'll otherwise be finished. All right, so page 10, I believe.
Kristen,
Yes.
so I have a question. Here you were explaining there is one probate advisory again. What is the deal? We should, if it's probate, we should mark this one, and the one is the very first box. Both of them we
Which
should
one are
mark.
you referring to, Malika?
Same 4C, the last one above the other second column is probate advisory, and it has check box.
Yes. If you
We
have
should-
probate, you should check that box and include it. Yes.
And the first one 4A as well, both of them. 4A.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. On page 14, sorry, of our contract, we'll come to paragraph 29 for liquidated damages. and 31 for arbitration, okay? These clauses are typically, they're optional. A buyer and seller do not have to agree to section 29 and 31. Liquidated damages, if you guys were in part 1 of my RPA class, there were a lot of questions about this. Liquidated damages limits the seller's ability to go after a buyer's deposit to 3% of the purchase price if this section is initial. So if you want to offer a larger than 3% initial deposit with your offer, you would not have the buyers initial this section, and you would not want the sellers to initial this section, okay? If it's initialed, it negates your increased deposit amount, because our contract still stipulates that only 3% is up for grabs if the buyer lifts all their contingencies and fails to close escrow. Okay, and then arbitration, again, optional. This is to arbitrate disputes. Buyer and seller typically do initial these sections. Okay. Also, if you use an electronic signing service, however it initiates these signatures, because they're optional, it doesn't usually present visually to the buyer signing it correctly. And so almost always the buyer misses the initial section on section 29 and 31. So I manually place them and I make them mandatory initial fields, not optional initial fields. Okay. Section 32, expiration of buyer's offer. That's under one of the very first lines that we fill out of the purchase contract up above. And then 32B. So entity buyers. Remember, if we're writing the offer in the name of an entity and not a natural person, we want to check this box. And we've talked about CAR form RCSD, which stands for Representative Capacity Signature Disclosure Statement. Okay. And they'd fill it out, letting the seller know, hey, this is who I am in relation to this entity, and this is why I have the authority to act on behalf of the entity. Okay. Or you could go ahead and you can have the buyer go ahead and, I think not or, also, you would check this box and you would also, hold on, if this paragraph is completed, RCSD is not required. So you can either include an RCSD form, or if the buyer is an entity, you can check this box, which I would recommend just checking this box so you can have fewer documents attached to your offer. And you would have the buyer fill out, or you on behalf of the buyer would fill out the legally authorized name of the signer. Okay, and if the entity's, what type of entity the entity is, right? Then the buyer would sign and date. If you have more than 2 buyers, you have to add CAR form ASA additional signature addendum. Okay. And what if you decide you want to have 2 buyers sign on the buyer line here and 1 here because you have 3 buyers? Can you legally do that? Yeah, you can. And I would probably do that just so it's clearer. I prefer that my buyers initial and sign in every place that they should. If they're using CAR form ASA, what if they say, oh, I never saw, you know, the arbitration clause up there. I didn't initial that. I just signed the ASA. I would prefer that the buyer signs all of it. Now, if I have more than 3 or 4 buyers, I probably need to use CAR form ASA, though if I can fit the buyer signatures and initials on my contract, I'm still going to do that anyway. Okay. I just wouldn't have their names printed here because this is what I fill out and I might run out of space there, but I would still have them sign up by the signature lines. And then I would go ahead and place their name on the CAR form ASA. All right, and then section 33 is for the seller. If the seller is countering, they would indicate that they're countering, okay? Or if they are just accepting, they would just sign and date, okay? This section is for proof that an offer has been reviewed by a seller but has not been accepted. I might ask a listing agent for this if I feel like they're being shady and didn't show my offer to the seller, which unfortunately actually happens. And I'm sure that's what led to this section being included in our offer. The next page is for our information, our signature, and our date. Okay, so guys, last but not least, when I am completing a buyer offer to submit, I shouldn't say that, not when I'm, one of the most common errors I see that a buyer's agent makes is they forget to have the buyer initial right here when they're making an offer. So don't forget that place. Okay, that's the end of the residential purchase agreement. There's a couple of advisories attached. Again, read through them. You need to understand them. The clients need to sign them, but that's it. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Christine, I have a question about the leasing. If I'm leasing a property and I have the
Wait,
co-sign.
listing or leasing, John? Listing or leasing?
Leasing.
Leasing, John, you have to call me later. Well, I'm not going to answer questions not about the.
Yes, I was asking, okay, good question.
Anyone else?
Kristen, yeah, real quick. Thank you so much. You're awesome.
Of course, thank you.
You went over really good stuff. Is it true? I've heard this before and I want some clarification because I was in a situation. Is it true that the RPA does not have any contingencies for the seller?
No, that's not true. The seller disclosure contingency is in there. The document contingency, if there are HOA documents, are in there, but absolutely seller disclosure contingency is in there.
Okay, so if a seller wants to cancel, he can cancel with his disclosure, right?
No, no, no. That doesn't give a seller a right to cancel. Sellers have almost no right to cancel.
Okay.
That's true. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Any questions?
No, thank you.
No? Okay. Well, I will see you guys next week, and I will be scheduling an extra class on the schedule in the next couple of weeks for the class I missed yesterday. But next Wednesday will be residential listing agreement. Okay, I'm just going to continue in order, but I am going to add a third class to a week here soon. Or actually what I might do, since I only teach one class the last 4 weeks of our 10-week session, I might just do 8 weeks of 2 classes instead of 7 weeks. Sorry, 7 weeks instead of 6.
Is James cooking today?
No, James is not
Well, cooking the rest for, you
James
better
is
put
a
him in
good
the,
cook, but John,
put him in
he's
the
too
kitchen.
messy. He's too messy. I don't like it.
Please.
Yeah.
You
It takes
teach him
me
some
longer to
discipline.
clean up than just cook myself.
Oh, no, he has to cook. You're teaching the class, he has to cook.
No, he's good at cooking. He's just too messy, John. I don't want to clean up after him.
Good luck to you. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I love you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, very insightful.
Very good. Oh, yeah. Very good.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good one. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Have a good day. Have a good
You
day.
too.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.